Well, we're back. We've got the injectors. An update from the last episode. The injectors were absolutely stuffed. So they've been refurbished. So they'll basically be like brand new. One thing I forgot to mention in the last episode was these little tiny crush washers. They sit in the top of your head underneath the injector. I forgot to mention about removing them. The ones in mine were absolutely stuffed. They were just basically just rust. So I've cleaned all them out of the head. When we put the injectors in, I'll talk about how they sit. We've got the spacers here which go on the injectors. Doesn't matter what way they go, they're the same either side. And the leak off pipe to injector washers. It's important. Well, these ones doesn't really matter because they're not grooved like the old ones. You can sit these on however you want. You'll see the tiny little holes in the washers there. That's for the fuel to leak back through, and that'll leak back into the leak off pipe and back to your tank. And yeah, so we've cleaned up the inlet manifold. I'll give it a little buff up where the gasket's going to sit, and I'll give you an update on where I'm up to with the engine, because things got interesting when I went to adjust the valves. Basically, I've gone to adjust the valves on number one there at top dead center, and we've put the feeler gauge in, and there is no clearance whatsoever with even the smallest feeler gauge. So I'm hoping that the head isn't stuffed and the valves are seating too high up, or they're leaking through or something along those lines. So I'm going to have to pull the cam off, get the shims out from underneath the cam, measure those shims up, and then gonna have to go buy some new ones and have to guess really what size I'm gonna need. I'm just going to get some smaller ones than what I've got now, because the equation of actually getting those getting the correct shims is you need to be able to measure between the cam lobe and the shim to actually get what shim you need. So yeah, what I'm going to have to do is put the injectors in with the washers, get them all tensioned up, and then I'm going to have to pull the glow plugs out, pull the cam off, and what I'm going to do is a leak down test. So with the cam off, the valves should be fully seated in the head, and doing a leak down test, it should tell me whether or not any air is getting through by the valves using a cylinder leakage tester. This one here. So yeah, we'll get started on that. Yeah, and I'll get these. So I'll get the injectors in first, and get them all seated, and yeah, we'll get into it. So the first thing we need to do is get these crush washers into the head. I don't know if you can see there, but there is two sides to this washer. One side is the round side, which I have sitting up there, and oh, now we've lost it. The other side is flat. It's a bit hard to see. Yeah, you need to have the flat side, which is on the top there, needs to sit down into the head, and the bottom of the injector will sit on the round side, and it'll crush down because they're a one-time use washer. That'll crush down and that'll seat nicely. And we've got the tensions here as well. So for the injector to the head, 65 Newton meters, and the return line nuts is 30 Newton meters. So I'll get those crush washers in. I'm going to use a little pick, slip the washer on the end, and just slip that down into the head. Alright, the injectors are in. They're only finger tight. I decided with the crush washers they weren't sitting exactly how I wanted them, so I plucked them back out and decided to stick them to the bottom of the injectors. Just put a tiny little bit of grease on there just to hold them on, and then when you put them in, they're absolutely as centered as they can be. Yeah, because the injector doesn't stick through them, so it makes it a little bit hard to get them centered when they're in the head. So what I'll do now is I'll set up the tension wrench and we'll tension them down, and then we'll be right to move on. Alright, the injectors are in, they're tensioned up to 65 newton meters and they're right to go. So we'll pull that the glow plugs off and the strap across them. Then I'll pull the timing case cover off, timing belt off, and the pulley for the cam, and then hopefully be able to pull the cam out, test the head for any leaks, get those shims out, and then yeah, hopefully it's happy days. Alright, got the timing cover off. Now we've got to get this belt off, so it involves pulling the tensioner off down there to release all the tension on the belt, and that'll just slip off. When you're doing a timing belt, or you're going to pull it off just to do whatever you're doing, pull a cam off, whatever, you need to make sure you got all your timing lines, all your timing marks lined up perfectly. So there's a mark right here that lines up with this mark here for top dead center, number 1. There's a mark down on the crank. Be a bit hard to see. You can't really see it from here. You can see the white line down there on the crank that lines up with the actual timing mark. I'll have to put that on there to make it a bit easier. That needs to be lined up down there. There's also a mark on the fuel pump pulley. It's really hard to see though. It's on the inner part of that pulley. Yeah, you only have to have that lined up if you had the belt off and you happen to spin the pump around or turn the crank or whatever. Yeah, that doesn't matter too much as long as everything else is lined up. So we'll get that all apart and then we'll be right to pull the cam out. Alright, got the belt off. I've just marked that timing mark just a little bit better with a white paint pen, just make life a bit easier. Pull the bolt out of that pulley. Now you need to get a puller to get these pulleys off, because the end of the cam is chamfered and there's a keyway in there and they're quite tight on there. You know, if you can't get it off with a pulley, give it a firm tap with a rubber mallet or something. It might loosen it, because once they get the timing spin movement, they just pop straight off. It's just, yeah, you don't want to damage it by putting a screwdriver or something in there. You'll break back your timing case or you'll damage something else. Yeah, so we'll get that off now. As simple as that. Make sure you don't lose your key there that sits on this side. To make sure that all goes together. Alright, now that we've got the pulley off, I'm hoping that I don't have to pull this timing case off. I think I can get the cam out without pulling the case off here. So it's just a matter of undoing your top bearing caps. Go along, undo all them, put them in order, because they'll be on there in a specific way. Don't lose your bearing unless you're going to replace it. And then yeah, we'll carefully wriggle that out and hopefully that'll slip out nice and easily. Got a new seal for there as well. I'll replace that, and I'll probably give that a little clean too. It's a bit of rust on there, which doesn't need to be there. Alright. Right, we've got the cam out. Now I've had a good look over that. Just checked any wear where the bearings sit. There's a little bit of wear there, but yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's enough to actually worry about. Can't feel any real marks there with my finger, so that'll go again. I will replace the front bearings though. They've had a bit of something go through it. You can hear it there. Very worn. Got some scoring in there. Might have like a little bit of dirt or something go around it. Bearings, those ones are stuffed, but up here it's okay. No actual marking on it, just a little bit of visual marking, but no, can't feel anything there. So they'll go again. Also, I forgot to mention, when you pull it out, you got this little retainer here. It sits around there. Easiest way to get that out is just get a screwdriver and knock it around with your cam loose, and then you can sort of half spin it and that'll pop straight out the other side. Spin that around and then that's all good. That'll save you pulling that timing case off and stuff around it and that sort of thing. Yeah, so now I'll pull the shims out and pull that seal out. Alright, got all the shims out and you can see I've labelled them. So there's you know, cylinder number 1, inlet exhaust, 2, inlet exhaust, etc, etc. They're all marked out, so I'll take them into work on Monday. I'll measure them and get how thick they are, and then I'll be able to get a rough idea of how small I need to get the next shim. So I'll probably get a couple for each one, just so I can get the clearance right. Yeah, so next is going to be checking whether or not we've got a head issue, if the valves are leaking or not. So how we set up for that is we mark out on the crank. This is just an easy way of knowing. You mark it on the crank into thirds. So obviously I've got it timed at the moment to top dead center number 1. So number 1 and 6 pistons will be at the top of their stroke. So if I mark out 2 more thirds, that means I can get, on the next turn, I can get the next set of cylinders, whether that be 2 and 5 or 3 and 4 or another way. They will be on the next third. 2 more cylinders will come to the top of the block and they'll be able to be tested for leak down. The point of having the piston all the way at the top is that's where you get the maximum amount of pressure when you pump it full of air, and that'll give us the best results, so we'll know if there's a leak or not. So yeah, mark your crank into thirds, and then when you turn it around you'll have an idea of where the crank is positioned. Or another way is if you get a small bit of wire, you can put it through where the glow plugs go, and you'll know when the piston's at the top just by watching that wire go up and down or feeling it. So I'll get that set up and then we will check for any leaks, and hopefully there's none. So what I was talking about with marking out the thirds and the crank is what I've done here. You can see I've got one at the top and then the 2 are down around the bottom. So they're roughly a third. They're not exactly a third, but they're pretty close. So when I get each of those marks to the top, at that point 2 pistons will also be at the top. So when we crank that around, we can also watch the air pressure on the gauge of the leak down tester, and that'll tell us when the pressure is built all the way up, which means the piston's at the top, and as soon as it starts going down again, we know it's on the way down. So there's 3 ways we can tell whether or not the piston's at the top. So whatever's easiest is what we're going to do. Alright, so the next step when setting up the cylinder tester is to get the right adapter to go in your head that hooks up to that tester there. That screws in where your glow plugs go. So I'll screw that into cylinder 1, hook up the tester, get the air compressor going, and we'll pump that up and we'll check if we've got any leaks. Alright, got the leak tester on it. As you can see there's the pressure going in. It's dropping because I put the air compressor off. Pressure going in, there's the pressure in the piston itself. This gauge is about 10 psi out, but you can hear it. There is a leak in the head, which isn't what we want. So that means one of the valves isn't seating. There's a cracked valve, the head's damaged. So basically I'm putting those injectors back in because they're gonna have to come back out. But yeah, that's basically how you test it anyway. So that's really annoying. So yeah, better get my wallet out again and get this head ready.